In 1928, a single photograph changed America forever. This woman, Ruth Snyder, became the first person ever photographed during their execution. But that's not even the worst part. The camera that captured this forbidden image was smuggled into the death chamber by a reporter who risked everything to expose America's darkest secret. What you're about to discover will horrify you. How a housewife's perfect murder turned into the nation's first trial of the century. How one illegal photograph sparked a revolution in how we view the death penalty, and why historians tried to bury this story for nearly a century. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this single image terrified the government so much that they banned execution photography nationwide. But before we reveal exactly how this photographer pulled off the impossible and snuck his camera past armed guards into one of America's most secure facilities, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Because what I'm about to show you isn't just a story about murder and execution. It's about how one photograph exposed America's bloodthirsty obsession with watching people die and changed our justice system forever. Picture this, it's 1927, and America is living in the Jazz Age. Prohibition is in full swing, the stock market is soaring, and everyone thinks the good times will never end. But beneath this glittering surface lurks something much darker. While Americans are dancing the Charleston and drinking illegal booze, the nation's justice system operates like a medieval torture chamber. Public executions draw crowds in the thousands. Newspapers compete to publish the most gruesome details of death row inmates' final moments. America is addicted to death, and everyone knows it. Enter Ruth Snyder. She looks like your typical 1920s housewife, pearl necklace, carefully curled hair, the picture of suburban respectability. She lives in Queens with her husband Albert and their young daughter. But here's what nobody tells you about Ruth Snyder. She's about to commit a murder so brutal, so calculated, that it will captivate the entire nation. You see, Ruth has a problem. Her husband Albert is worth more dead than alive, exactly $96,000 more, thanks to a massive life insurance policy. And Ruth has been planning the perfect murder for months. But here's where this story gets truly twisted. Ruth's execution won't just be about justice, it will become the greatest media spectacle in American history. Reporters will bribe guards, crowds will camp outside the prison for days, and one photographer will risk his life to capture the image that no one was supposed to see. This isn't just a story about murder. It's about how America's obsession with death entertainment reached its horrifying peak, and how one photograph changed everything. Because when you see what happened to Ruth Snyder, you'll understand why this case terrified the government so much that they completely transformed how executions work in America. But first, you need to understand just how twisted Ruth's plan really was. On March 20th, 1927, Ruth Snyder believed she was about to get away with the perfect murder. She had spent months planning every detail, every lie, every piece of evidence. But here's what she didn't count on: her own stupidity. Picture this scene. It's past midnight, and Ruth creeps through her own house like a burglar. She's wearing gloves, carrying a sash weight, a heavy window counterweight that will become her murder weapon. Her husband Albert is sleeping peacefully in their bed, completely unaware that his wife is about to bash his skull in. But Ruth isn't just committing murder, she's staging the crime of the century. After killing Albert with 7 brutal blows to the head, she ties herself up with rope, gives herself minor injuries, and prepares to tell the police an incredible lie: that Italian burglars broke into their home, killed her husband, and left her for dead. The insurance money, a staggering $96,000, equivalent to over $1.5 million today. Ruth had been secretly increasing Albert's life insurance policies for months, forging his signature, paying premiums he never knew existed. She even took out additional policies through different companies, creating a paper trail that would have made her rich beyond her wildest dreams. But when the police arrive at 8:30 a.m. on March 21st, Ruth's performance begins to fall apart immediately. Detective Arthur Carey later wrote in his notes, "Something about her story stank from the minute she opened her mouth. The burglars supposedly ransacked the entire house, but somehow missed Ruth's expensive jewelry sitting in plain sight. They allegedly tied her up but left the knots loose enough for her to escape. Most damning of all, They killed her husband but barely scratched her. Within hours, the police discover Ruth's lies are even more elaborate than they imagined. Hidden in her bedroom, they find love letters, passionate, explicit letters that reveal Ruth has been having a torrid affair with a corset salesman named Henry Judd Gray. But here's what the newspapers didn't tell you: these weren't just love letters. They were detailed plans for murder, written in code. Ruth had been manipulating Gray for months, convincing him that Albert was abusive, that he was threatening to kill her, that murder was their only escape. The police interrogation transcripts reveal Ruth's desperation as her perfect plan crumbles. "I don't know what you're talking about," she repeats over and over, even as detectives produce evidence of her lies. But Ruth had a secret accomplice no one suspected, and when police finally track him down, the real horror of this case will be revealed. When police arrested Henry Judd Gray at his Syracuse hotel, the true depravity of Ruth's plan was finally exposed. This mild-mannered corset salesman had been completely manipulated by Ruth into becoming her murder weapon. But here's what nobody tells you about how America reacted to this revelation. They didn't blame the man who actually swung the murder weapon. They blamed the woman who seduced him. The media coverage was unlike anything America had ever seen. "Ruthless Ruth," screamed the headlines. "The deadly blonde," declared another. The New York Daily News called her the most cold-blooded woman who ever lived. Every newspaper in the country competed to paint Ruth as the most evil woman in American history. But here's the twisted part. Henry Judd Gray, the man who actually delivered the fatal blows to Albert Snyder's head, was portrayed almost as a victim. Headlines called him the weak-willed lover and the man under Ruth's spell. The same newspapers that demonized Ruth described Gray with almost sympathetic language. Why? Because 1920s America couldn't accept that a woman could be the mastermind of such a calculated murder. Society expected women to be victims, not killers. So they created a narrative where Ruth was a manipulative she-devil who corrupted an innocent man. The trial began on April 18, 1927, and it immediately became a media circus. Over 1,500 reporters applied for press credentials. Western Union installed 20 additional telegraph lines just to handle the news coverage. Radio stations provided live updates. This was America's first trial of the century, 40 years before O.J. Simpson. Imagine yourself sitting in that courtroom. Ruth sits at the defendant's table, perfectly composed, wearing a black dress and pearls. She shows no emotion as witness after witness describes the brutal murder. Meanwhile, Gray sobs uncontrollably, begging for mercy, claiming Ruth forced him to do it. The prosecution's case was devastating. They produced Ruth's love letters, her forged insurance documents, and most damning of all, her own contradictory statements to police. District Attorney Richard Newcomb told the jury, "This woman is a cold-blooded, calculating killer who used sex and manipulation to turn an innocent man into a murderer." But the defense had an impossible task. How do you defend someone the entire country already believes is guilty? Ruth's own lawyer privately admitted to reporters, "We're not trying to prove she's innocent. We're just trying to save her from the electric chair." On May 9, 1927, after deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Both Ruth and Gray were sentenced to death. But what happened next was even more shocking than the murder itself. January 12, 1928. Ruth Snyder is about to become the first woman executed in New York's electric chair in 27 years. But what the authorities don't know is that sitting among the 24 official witnesses is a man with a camera strapped to his ankle, about to capture the most forbidden photograph in American history. Meet Tom Howard, a photographer for the Chicago Tribune. For weeks, Howard has been planning the impossible: how to photograph an execution when cameras are absolutely prohibited, when guards search every witness, when the penalty for being caught could mean years in prison. Here's how he did it. Howard strapped a small camera to his ankle, hidden beneath his pants leg. The camera had a cable release that ran up his leg, through his clothing, and into his jacket pocket. One squeeze of the hidden trigger and history would be made, but getting the camera inside was only half the battle. Howard had to time the photograph perfectly. He would get exactly one shot. There was no flash, no second chance, no room for error. and he had to do it while surrounded by guards, prison officials, and other witnesses, all watching for any suspicious movement. The execution chamber at Sing Sing was a nightmare designed to intimidate. The chair itself sat in the center of a small room, surrounded by glass windows where witnesses could watch the condemned person die. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the metallic scent of electrical equipment. The only sounds were the hum of generators and the whispered prayers of witnesses. At exactly 11:01 p.m., Ruth Snyder was led into the chamber. She had spent her final hours writing letters to her daughter, maintaining her innocence to the end. The witnesses watched in horrified silence as guards strapped her into the chair, placed the metal cap on her head, and attached the electrodes. Here's what Tom Howard wrote in his own account of that night. "My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I knew I had one chance, one moment to capture what no one was supposed to see." At 11:06 p.m., the executioner pulled the switch. 2,000 volts of electricity surged through Ruth's body, and at that exact moment, Tom Howard squeezed the cable release in his pocket. The photograph was taken. The most forbidden image in American history was now captured on film. But Howard's work was far from over. He had to smuggle the film out of the prison, develop it, and get it to his newspaper without being caught. When that photo hit newsstands the next morning, America would never be the same. On January 13, 1928, Americans opened their newspapers to see something they were never supposed to witness: a human being dying in the electric chair. The New York Daily News ran Tom Howard's photograph on the entire front page, with just one word as the headline: "Dead." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Churches condemned the photograph as an affront to human dignity. Politicians called for investigations. Prison officials were furious, launching a massive hunt to discover how the camera had been smuggled inside. But here's what nobody expected. The American public couldn't stop looking. The Daily News sold over 1.5 million copies that day, their highest circulation in history. Newspapers across the country reprinted the photograph. People stood in lines around the block to buy copies. America was simultaneously horrified and fascinated by this glimpse into their justice system's most secret moment. But the photograph revealed something deeper and more disturbing than just Ruth Snyder's death. It exposed the barbaric reality of how America executed its criminals. You can see the leather straps cutting into her body, the metal cap crushing her skull, the way her entire frame convulses against the chair. This wasn't the clean, humane process authorities had promised the public. This was torture, plain and simple. The letters poured in by the thousands. "How dare you show us this horror," wrote one reader, but another wrote, "Thank you for showing us what we do in our name. I will never support the death penalty again." The photograph had done something unprecedented. It forced America to confront the brutal reality of state-sanctioned killing. Within months, the consequences began. Prison officials banned all photography equipment from executions nationwide. Witness lists were scrutinized more carefully. Security measures were dramatically increased. The era of execution secrecy had begun, all because of one forbidden photograph. But the changes went deeper than just prison policy. The photograph sparked a national debate about whether women should face the same punishments as men. Religious leaders questioned whether any execution could be humane. Legal scholars argued that if executions were too horrible to photograph, perhaps they were too horrible to perform. Tom Howard never faced charges for his secret photography. By the time authorities figured out how he did it, he was safely back in Chicago, and the statute of limitations had expired. He later said, "I showed America what it really looks like when we kill someone. People needed to see that." Ruth Snyder's execution marked the end of an era. Never again would executions be the public spectacles they had been in the 1920s. The photograph had accomplished what decades of reform efforts couldn't. It made Americans question whether watching people die was entertainment or barbarism. The most shocking revelation: this single photograph began the transformation of America's death penalty from public spectacle to private procedure, from entertainment to somber necessity, all because one man risked everything to show us who we really were. So there you have it, the story of how one illegal photograph changed America forever. Tom Howard's forbidden image didn't just capture Ruth Snyder's death. It captured the moment America began to question its own bloodlust. But here's what's truly disturbing. Today's true crime obsession mirrors 1928's media frenzy perfectly. We still can't look away from murder stories. We still turn killers into celebrities. We still consume death as entertainment. We've just moved from newspaper photos to Netflix documentaries. Ruth Snyder believed she had planned the perfect murder, but she became something much more significant. The woman whose death photograph forced America to confront its darkest impulses. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Tom Howard's photograph was groundbreaking journalism that exposed truth, or was it exploitation of a human being's final moments? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as fascinating and disturbing as I did, you need to watch my next video about the serial killer who inspired Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. The real story is far more twisted than any movie. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because that story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about America's most famous horror film.